Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Engage for Education Equity webinar. Today we'll be sharing about our new toolkit on community involvement in implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we're very excited to have all of you joining us to learn about the new resource. Just a few technical reminders about how the webinar is going to work. All participants will be on mute for the majority of the time until we get to our question and answer period towards the end. So if you have any questions during the webinar, we encourage you to write them in the chat box. And once we get to Q&A, we can read them out. When we get to Q&A, you can also raise your hand through the GoToWebinar screen if you'd like us to unmute you if you want to ask your question verbally, or you can also type your questions into the chat box during that time as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Liz Sullivan-Uknes. I'm the Education Campaigns Director at NAACP, the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative, and part of the Dignity in Schools campaign. And I'm just going to go through our agenda for today and also introduce our speakers. So in terms of the overview, we're going to share a little bit of information about who we are and how we got here. The Dignity in Schools campaign has worked on this Engage for Education Equity Toolkit with our partners at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Partners for Each and Every Child, who we'll hear more about during the webinar. And then we're going to talk a bit about the Every Student Succeeds Act and why we're engaging now around implementation of ESSA. We're at a critical moment as states have submitted their plans for implementation, and we're now at the district and school level in terms of needs assessments and implementation. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll walk through the toolkit itself, what it is and how you can use it in your work nationally and locally. And then we will hear from an organizer who's a member of the Dignity in Schools campaign in Georgia in terms of how they've been using the toolkit and working on ESSA implementation at the local level in their community. And then we will have our question and answer period where we hope folks will engage and ask questions about the toolkit and about work around ESSA in general. In terms of introducing our panelists, as I said, I'm Liz. I'm the facilitator today, but you'll mostly be hearing from our three presenters. We have Liz Olson with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Sophie Green with Partners for Each and Every Child, a project of the Opportunity Institute, and Marlon Tillman, a local organizer with Gwinnett Stop and a member of the Dignity in Schools campaign based in Georgia. So before we get started with our presentation, we wanted to do a poll question to hear from you and learn a little bit more about who is on the line with us today. So I've launched a poll here asking what your role is in education. If you're a national organization, a local group, a parent or student, teacher, or work with the school or district, or if you are a different kind of community stakeholder, you can check other and type in the chat box to let us know what kind of community you work with and who you represent. One of the great things about the toolkit, which you'll learn about today, is that there are sections of it that apply and can be used by a lot of different stakeholders in education. There is a handouts area in the GoToWebinar that you'll see on your right side, where there's 4 PDFs that we've uploaded. One is the full toolkit, but then there's also examples of tailored parts of the toolkit. So there's an organizer's packet, there's a section for parents and families, and a section specifically for young people. So during the webinar, you can check that out, but we also encourage you to take a look at that after the webinar, download those resources and use them in your community. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results of the poll. Let's see. There we go. So we'll see we've got about 38% national organizations on the line, 56% from local nonprofit or community-based groups, about 19% each on the line representing parents or students or teacher or school or district staff. And then we do have a few folks from other community stakeholders. And so we're really glad to have all of you joining us today. And as I said, there's parts of the toolkit that can be useful for each of the different stakeholder groups that you represent. So we'll head back to the webinar slides now, and I will invite Liz Olson from the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund to take over.
Thanks, Liz. So as Liz said, my name is Liz Olson. I'm the Senior Policy Associate at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. So LDF DSC, and Partners for Each and Every Child came together to develop the toolkit to empower families, students, and advocates to promote educational equity in their communities. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about what we mean when we talk about equity. When we talk about education equity, we envision schools where all students have the resources they need to be successful. Some students need more and different resources than others, including low-income students, students with disabilities, English language learners, and students from communities of color who have historically been denied equal access to educational opportunity. These resources may include additional funding and supports to provide students access to excellent teachers, rigorous curriculum, and supports that promote positive school environments where all students can learn. School communities have the opportunity to leverage the federal Every Student Succeeds Act to ensure that all students have access to safe, nurturing environments where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is the most recent version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or the ESSA, which is a civil rights law that was passed in 1965 as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty agenda. The law is intended to ensure that states provide all children equal educational opportunity, and it's the main way the federal government provides education funding to states, specifically focused on supporting students from low-income families. Under the law, states must meet certain requirements for how to use these funds and how to measure school quality and student success. The ESSA has been changed and approved by Congress numerous times, and the previous version was the No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB. Congress passed ESSA in 2015, and this current version of the law gives states and districts much more flexibility to decide how to measure student performance and school quality, and what to do if schools don't meet benchmarks determined by the state. In exchange for this flexibility, states, districts, and schools must engage with community members in order to make decisions that meet their needs, and it's critical that parents, students, and other community stakeholders be involved in decisions that impact their schools. One of the first steps in the process to implement the law was the development of ESSA state plans. LDF has been working with DSC to build the capacity of community stakeholders to engage with their states to ensure that state plans address the issues that community members care most about. School climate is one of the things that DSC members care most about when it comes to educational equity, because we know that students cannot learn if they're not in school. We also know that students of color, and Black students in particular, are disproportionately impacted by practices that remove students from the classroom, and we know that these practices have a negative impact on students' learning. According to the U.S. Department of Education's most recent civil rights data, during the 2015-2016 school year, Black K-12 students made up 15% of the total student population, but 39% of the students who received at least one school suspension. Students who are suspended from school lose important instructional time and are more likely to repeat a grade, drop out of school, and become involved in the juvenile justice system, and they're less likely to graduate from school on time. LDF has been working to support DSC members to ensure that states prioritize strategies that improve school climate in their state plans, and ESSA presents a few opportunities to do this. So, for example, all states have to use certain indicators of student success, such as test scores and graduation rates, in order to measure school quality. States also have the option to include indicators of school climate, such as school discipline data, within the school quality measures they select, and we have encouraged them to do that. Also under ESSA, all states must describe how they will support districts with improving the learning environment, including by reducing the overuse of exclusionary discipline, and we encourage states to make sure they're outlining effective strategies for promoting positive school climates in their plans. So this could include using ESSA funds to support restorative justice practices and other alternatives to practices that push students out of the classroom. During the development of state plans, DSC members participated in ESSA listening sessions and working groups held in their states, and they held meetings and sent letters to state education department officials to ensure that state plans include effective strategies for promoting positive school climates and reducing racial disparities in school discipline. All state plans have now been submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, and most of those plans have been approved by the department. The remaining 4 plans are expected to be approved in the coming days or weeks. So some states have outlined positive steps toward promoting educational equity and positive school climate in their state plans, but more work definitely needs to be done at the local level, and meaningful community engagement is critical to the success of these efforts. Like states, schools and school districts must engage families and other community members as they develop and implement their plans, such as local ESSA plans and school improvement plans for schools identified as low performing. We developed the Engage for Education Equity Toolkit to give community members the tools they need to meaningfully engage with school and district leaders throughout this process. And now I'll turn it over to Sophie to talk more about the development of the toolkit and the resources it includes.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. I'm Sophie Green. I'm a program director with the Partners for Each and Every Child project at the Opportunity Institute. The Opportunity Institute is a nonprofit focused on issues related to education equity and excellence in education. And the Partners for Each and Every Child project works with a vast network of national, state, and local partners to advance educational policies that are attentive to matters of equity and responsive to the needs of school communities. We were really fortunate to work with the Dignity in Schools campaign and the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund to develop this engagement toolkit. And I also just wanted to note on the next slide, actually, that we had support from a number of other partners and organizations, including the voices of community members. We worked on this toolkit over the last several months, holding over 25 meetings and having several different events in more than 10 states and DC with parents and families, with students, with school board members, educators and advocates and other organizers, all to contribute to this toolkit. So it's been a really amazing collaborative project. With all that amazing participation, we came up with this Engage for Education Equity Toolkit. I'll just quickly note for those of you on the webinar that the web address for the full toolkit and all the various tools is at the bottom of this slide at partnersforeachandeverychild.org/engage-for-ed-equity. So beginning with what is the toolkit is a set of resources, a bunch of different tools, all focused on ESSA, on equity, and on engagement in the school improvement process specifically. So in other words, this is a set of tools to help community members seize the opportunity of ESSA and get involved in making schools better for each and every kid. The toolkit includes fact sheets, meeting materials like agendas, worksheets, template letters, posters, and action steps for families, students, and other community members. It also begins with an organizer's packet, which is one of the handouts in this webinar. And that organizer's packet includes information and action steps specifically for community leaders and organizers. So it's sort of a place to begin for those of you who will be hosting meetings or helping to gather folks together. It's a lot, this toolkit. It's many, many pages, and we're not expecting, nor do we want anyone to pick up the entire toolkit and attempt to go through every page. Instead, we hope that you will pick and choose what is relevant to you. So we recommend starting with the organizer's packet and then moving into the set of tools and sort of choosing what makes the most sense for whether you're hosting a meeting or attending one, writing a letter to your school board, or just looking to learn more about ESSA and school improvement. The website, again, it's at partnersforeachandeverychild.org/engage-for-ed-equity, has a bunch of sample packets of materials for you to use. So, for example, if you're an organizer and you're hosting a meeting with families and parents and you want to know what to grab, you might pick the organizer's packet to get yourself sort of read in, and then the parent family 2-pager to distribute at the meeting and talk through, and then the materials, the meeting materials packet, which includes a sample agenda that you can use for the meeting, some meeting norms, and a sample exit survey, things like that. The website also includes a long list of links to state-specific resources that your state has created around their ESSA plans. And we strongly recommend that in addition to the toolkit and the overview for your state's ESSA plan, in whatever you're sort of looking through and working on, that you also include other local materials like your school's report card, or any up-to-date information that a school community organization or advocacy organization in your community has to sort of help give you really specific information about how to get involved in your school. I'll also quickly note that we've been a little slow with the translation, but a full Spanish version of this toolkit will be up next week. We're very excited about that. And I'll close by just saying that this is a living document. It's a living set of tools. And moving forward, we hope that it will continue to change and grow based on how people are using it in their communities and also what they're learning from their school and district leaders. Since the release of the toolkit at the end of April, we've already had a number of community meetings, which is great, all around the country. And those meetings have contributed to the thinking and content of the document, and also, more importantly, to community involvement in ESSA implementation, which is great. So now I will turn it over to Marlyn. She's a DSC Federal Liaison and lead organizer in Gwinnett County Schools as co-founder of Gwinnett Stop. And she's going to share a little bit about her work, and we'll share a little bit more about how she's been using some of these tools in her community. Marlyn.
Hi, Sophie. Thank you so much. I apologize. It may get just a little loud where I'm at. But I am Marlyn Tillman, Executive Director, co-founder of Gwinnett Stop. We're a parent-led organization that's focused on dismantling school-to-prison pipeline in Gwinnett County. And we've been around for a minute, fighting the good fight. Not letting districts get away with the things that have been going on. And so as part of our work on ESSA, we've been on the ground from the very beginning. So when ESSA was in the works of being crafted, we were part of the group that was hitting the hill and talking to our senators and Department of Ed as to how that should look. And so we were happy that it had a lot of parent and student engagement. However, we weren't happy that the federal oversight was lost. What we did need to, and in that came about the toolkit, the need for families and parents and youth to know that this fight has been moved to the ground. It's no longer a federal fight. It is moved to the ground, and we're going to have to act in order to push and get the things that we need in our schools. And so with the toolkit, it was great to be able to present it to parents, work through some of the workshops with them, and really have a deeper conversation on what their role is, what it can be, what it looks like, how do they move forward in this fight that's now very much a local fight. And so the toolkit helps you engage your parents and youth on that kind of level. What can they absolutely do? It's not what can someone else do. It is what they can actually do. It gives a full explanation of the things that parents need to look out for. The school improvement section is very detailed, whether you look at it from the fact sheet side or within the organizers packet. It's really chock full of good information, plain language that parents and youth can connect to. One of my favorite things in the toolkit is what does an engaged community look like? It is the perfect conversation starter to get people thinking and talking about equity. What does that look like for our students? What does it look like for our schools? Start to dream big, and then transfer that into another exercise that actually helps you draft what it is that you need for your school. What does an engaged community look like? It is my favorite section. I've used it outside of an ESSA training as well as within an ESSA training. And I see that always being our place of starting so that we're all grounded with the same things. and we have the same information. And so this is a great tool for organizers. This is a great tool for parents who just want more information. They may not go into further advocacy, but it gives them that dialogue. It lets them know what's being said. No longer will districts be talking over their heads. And so this is a great, great tool. If you use the entire toolkit, then you think of it as your reference. It is your Google. It can refer you on to other places. So if you pull up a fact sheet, it'll tell you, do you want more information? Go to this page in the toolkit. Get that deeper information, get that deeper knowledge so that you're not being talked over in meetings. And for organizers, it's great to give parents that power, that they know what they're looking for. They know what to ask for, and they can move it forward from there. When schools return, all districts will be working on their school improvement plans, and I see this as a training opportunity for all our parents, so that, especially in the Title I schools, that they can then start to engage the school before they come to them. Don't wait for the school to come to you. You know, this is something you can go ask the principal about. Go ask the teachers, are you involved in the school improvement committee? What's going on? What do I need to know about it? And so it's a great piece to kind of tee it up and start that conversation at a local level, build it up, take it out to your district level. And as states start to tweak their ESSA plan, you can use the toolkit again in looking for things that may not have been in your state plan, but you'd like to see that. There's an advocacy section on what are the steps for this advocacy. So this really is a holistic tool. It really speaks to what parents and youth need to not have the space talked over again, which we're so used to having. And so we're going to have an apples for apples conversation in the schools using the toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you for sharing about what you're working on. And, you know, we just want to share that we're grateful as the Dignity in Schools campaign and the other national partners working on this for all of the community leaders who gave us their time in working on the resource, but also now, most importantly, we want to encourage and support folks to use it as much as possible. So that is a perfect transition into our question and answer period to give all of you a chance to ask us questions. As you see on the Q&A slide, we have the link again to the website where the full toolkit is offered as a PDF, but there's also several other PDFs that you can download for specific sections of the toolkit that are applicable to different communities, as well as different kinds of handouts and exercises that you can do. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have a few PDFs uploaded to this webinar, which you can click on and download. So as we transition to the Q&A portion, there's a couple questions that I could share. One person did ask if there's going to be a recording of the webinar available. So we are recording it, and we'll share it with the registration list so that all of you can access the recording. There's a couple other questions that have come in. We have one asking, how will I know when my district is starting the school improvement process? So can any of our presenters share about how folks will know when that process is starting locally?
Hi, yes, I can jump in. So this is Sophie Green again with the Opportunity Institute. The process of getting involved in local implementation of ESSA begins sort of as soon as possible. This summer is a really great chance to jump in. That said, schools and districts who have been identified under their state's accountability systems as needing additional support and attention from the state will have additional requirements, and that will begin starting this coming school year, close to the end of the school year. Liz, if you want to jump in and give any further detail, that would be great.
Okay. And just a reminder, if you have questions, you can type them into the question or chat box in the GoToWebinar. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted and ask it verbally. Another question that we have asks, will my school have to redo their needs assessment if they already did one last year? So is there anyone who'd like to take that question?
Hi, this is Liz from LDF. I'm sorry, I was having trouble getting off mute for the last question, but I don't really have anything to add to what Sophie said, except for it's great to, if you don't already have relationships with district administrators, to begin to develop those relationships now, to reach out to them and to ask specifically when they're going to be starting that process, when they're going to be engaging with the community, and let them know that you are interested in being involved in that. In terms of the school improvement plan, so if your school or the schools that you work with were identified as in need of support and improvement last year, they may not necessarily be identified for this year if the state has kind of changed the accountability system. But if it is, then districts definitely should develop new needs assessments. Because the needs may have changed from one year to the next. So that's something that you might have to push for. Districts may try to use the same needs assessments that they've used in the past, but you can push back on that and let them know that the needs assessment needs to reflect the needs of the community now, and make sure that you're a part of that process.
Thanks, Liz. We have another question that came in asking about Spanish and English translation. Are those the only languages that the toolkit will be available in, or is there plans to do translation into any other languages?
It's a great question. I'll jump in on that again. My name is Sophie. Right now, the only plan is for Spanish language translation, which is resource dependent. We would love to translate it into additional languages. So as we go forward and continue this effort and kind of branch into further opportunities given the resources, we would love to translate it into additional languages.
And this is Liz Sullivan. I would also just say, if there is a specific language that would be helpful for your local work, let us know. So if you want to add that in the chat box, what the language is that you'd be interested in accessing. Even if we currently don't have the resources to translate the entire toolkit, there are certainly sections like the parent or student guide or portions of the organizer packet or like specific exercises or worksheets that would be particularly useful. We could always identify some smaller pieces to do an initial translation into another language. Until we have resources to translate the entire thing. So if you want to share any other specific languages that would be helpful for your local work, please do. And just another reminder for folks, you can raise your hand through the webinar, or you can also type questions into the question or chat box in the GoToWebinar program. I do have one other question. How do we make this relevant to our own community, district, or state?
I'll jump in again on that just to briefly reiterate that I think this document, this toolkit is meant to be sort of broadly applicable, which means it's both useful in that way that everybody can use it, and also less useful because it is not going to include really specific information that school communities need about their specific school community, their school, their district. The way to find additional information around that will be to use your community leaders, your community advocates, and to work with those leaders, including your school leaders, but also your community-based organizational leaders, other parents and families, any leadership structures in your community, to put together local information, which you can find on your school's report card. You can find based on community-based student programming, things like that. So it's really going to mean that you work with your partners and kind of connect with your community in order to put together more specifically relevant information for your local community. Our hope is that this toolkit will give you a little bit of an outline of what you'd be looking for.
Thanks, Sophie. Another question is in terms of school discipline or climate issues, what would you suggest that as we kind of like approach the school or community about the needs assessment process that we particularly emphasize, or how should we approach including those issues in the work around school or district needs assessment processes?
This is Liz from LDF. I can start off. So as I mentioned, we really push states to use discipline data as an accountability indicator, so that if schools were suspending students of color, for example, at high rates, that those issues would be flagged and schools would be held accountable for addressing them. Most states did not select that indicator within their accountability system. California is one of the few states that is looking at suspension rates in accountability, which is great. But for most states which are not looking at discipline data in terms of sort of a school improvement within accountability, the needs assessments for low performing schools, for schools that are identified for comprehensive supported improvement, is a great place to make sure that low performing schools are not pushing students out of school. We know that that's one of the drivers of academic achievement. And so it could be that part of what's driving that low performance is that students are being pushed out of school and are losing instructional time. And so pushing for needs assessments for schools identified for comprehensive supported improvement to include either discipline data or school climate surveys, or both, would be a great way to try to promote school discipline reform at the local level.
Thanks, Liz. Would anyone else like to add? Okay. Another question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges going into local or district ESSA implementation?
I'll jump in on that. Again, this is Sophie. I would love to ask the audience this question. I think there's been a couple of things that have come up, though, that I'd love to mention. One thing that we've seen is just sort of getting the information out there that first, that there is this opportunity and this new change under ESSA, and second, that it's required that communities be involved in that process at the local level, and really sort of stressing that communities have a right to be there. The second thing I'll say is knowing exactly how to be involved is a challenge for community members, but it's also a challenge for schools and districts. And so really finding the resources to spend time, and I do mean financial, but I also mean personnel resources and basic just spending the time to create a strategy for engagement and collaboration that's meaningful for all folks involved. And that really prioritizes the needs of those students that have the greatest academic and social needs in their schools. I think that's been a major challenge as well, just the capacity that there's a need to hold space for engagement at the local level.
Thanks, Sophie. Does anyone else want to share challenges that they anticipate coming up, or that they've already had in their work around ESSA?
This is Liz. So similarly, I would say it does seem that there's been more lack of transparency, or just like not as much information publicly available or easily available, or people don't know where to find the information in terms of when exactly their school district is going to start their community engagement around local ESSA plans, and the dates for that and where to go. I mean, states definitely did vary in terms of how easy they made that information to find, but it seems like it's been a little bit more challenging at the district level. So As I mentioned before, I think it's really important to, if you have those relationships at the district level, to be sure to leverage those and just start reaching out to your contacts and make sure that they know that you want to be engaged and to work with other community members in your community to engage with them. And if you don't have those relationships yet, it would be great to start working with others in your community to start to build those.
Thanks, Liz. We have a couple other questions that have come in. So one question is from Lula Moore, President of Parents for Public Schools of GLC, and they have hosted 3 community ESSA forum conversations from 2017 to 2018 with much support from their Department of Education, state legislators, but the school district superintendents have not partnered with them to reach out to parents. So I think this is related somewhat to what you were just saying, Liz. So do you have any suggestions to utilize with those school district leaders specifically to help impact their understanding of the need for parents to participate, but also to make sure parents get knowledge and information about ESSA and how it benefits everyone in the district?
So this is Liz again. I can start. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that they know that they are required to ensure that the community is meaningfully engaged. There are some great toolkit resources that you can use in outreach efforts to them about what meaningful engagement looks like and why it's so important. I think, in addition to their legal obligations around community engagement, to be able to highlight for them that any plans that they develop and implement are going to be much more effective if the community that is most directly impacted by the decisions that they make are bought in and have input into that and can help with implementation. Community organizations can help support effective implementation of district plans. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the key points that I can think of, is letting them know that it's a requirement and letting them know why it's important and how it'll help them achieve their goals.
I also just want to quickly jump in that I think one of the things that we've seen Partners for Each and Every Child in our conversations with district and school leaders on other projects and on this one is that often consultation and engagement with their communities doesn't immediately present as what you think it is. So what I mean by that is I'll ask a district or school leader kind of, what do you do to engage your community? And the first answer is 1 or 2 things, but the 10th answer is 50 different things. And so just sort of being clear about what you mean by engagement and what exactly it is that you're expecting from district and school leaders in terms of how they're going to be welcoming their communities and what sort of real meaningful engagement opportunities they already give that can be expanded on and added to in really exciting new ways could be helpful as well.
Thank you, Liz and Sophie. We have another question asking about a concrete example for where to start. And so Sheila shared that it's been difficult figuring out sort of how to start the conversation. They have relationships in the district and have approached some folks, but do you feel like starting with the school board is best? Should they invite stakeholders for a dialogue? What do you all feel like is the most effective, or a couple examples of concrete places to start the conversation?
So I think everything starts at the lowest level. So when you're talking about school improvement plans, it needs to be at your local school. By all means, you can contact your district office to see if they have an overarching schedule of what the school should be on, and that way you know whether you're getting the right information from your local school or not. But you need to start at that school level so that you're on the planning process.
Thanks, Marlon. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Okay, I don't have any other current questions, so if there is anyone else on the line who had a question that they'd like to ask, again, you can type it into the question or chat box, or you can also raise your hand on the webinar screen. While we're waiting to see if there's any other final questions, maybe we can share the last couple slides where we wanted to thank all of you for joining, but also thank a number of people who've been a part of the process. So first, if you have any questions, you can feel free to reply to the webinar registration link with Natalie Chapp's email. She's our Dignity in Schools Campaign National Coordinator. And you can also email Sophie at theopportunityinstitute.org. Her email is on the screen, and she can help answer questions or connect you to more information about the toolkit and the Engage for Ed Equity work around ESSA. And then we also just wanted to thank a number of the organizations and foundations who help contribute to the work on the next slide. And we can see here, United Parent Leaders for Action, the U-Plan Network, has helped give feedback and be a part of creating the parent supplement. So thank you. Thanking the Leadership Conference, National Urban League, and Ed Council for helping us to help spread the word about the toolkit and disseminate it within their networks. And then we list here a number of foundations that we also want to thank. And of course, all of the local organizations, parents, families, students, and community members that help make the toolkit a reality within the Dignity in Schools campaign membership, but also other networks and organizations around the country. So just wanted to give those thank yous to everyone who contributed and helped create the toolkit. So just a reminder, if anybody does have any final questions, you can share them through the chat box or raise your hand. So I'll give it maybe one other minute, and if not, we can wrap up the webinar. So any final questions from folks? All right, well, thank you everybody so much for joining. We did record the webinar today, so we can share the recording, and then there's links to download the full toolkit as well as various supplements, handouts, and exercises. So thank you everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.